Ethan mocked me openly in front of everyone, boasting to his friends. All it takes is one word from me, and she'll bow down and apologize. Everyone thought I was sincerely devoted to Ethan. Then one day, Ethan's closest friend revealed our relationship on social media. Ethan lost control, raging like a wild animal, shouting and storming around. Chapter 1. On Christmas night, snow fell for hours, blanketing the ground. The dorm lights were about to turn off when my phone rang. It was Ethan calling. Hello. Sana, I had a bit too much to drink. Can you come pick me up? I'm at number 8 Club, 3rd floor, room 366. He hung up before I could respond, as if certain I would come, regardless of the falling snow outside. Sighing, I reluctantly got out of bed and threw on my coat. Sana, are you going to see Ethan again? My roommate Rain asked, poking her head through her bed curtain. I nodded. She looked at me, as if she wanted to say something, but ended up only reminding me to wear an extra layer. Everyone knew. I really liked Ethan. I was sure he knew too. When I reached the door to his room and was about to push it open, I heard laughter inside. Ethan, do you think Sana will actually come? It's so late and it's snowing out. Even in a noisy crowd, I could immediately recognize Ethan's voice. Of course she'll come. He sounded smug, likely because of the alcohol. One call, and she'll be down on her knees polishing my shoes. You don't believe me? More laughter erupted. I walked in, pushing the atmosphere to an awkward high. The room was hazy with smoke and dimly lit. Ethan sat in the center of the couch with a woman draped over his right arm. I was no longer surprised by such scenes. Over the years, Ethan was never short of female companions. Everyone stopped talking when I entered, as if they'd tacitly agreed not to mention what they'd just said. Haven't you had enough to drink? I asked, ignoring the woman glaring at me. She wouldn't last more than 3 days by Ethan's side. Ethan let go of the woman next to him and wrapped an arm around my waist, laughing. We're playing truth or dare with the guys. Dare? Nope, truth. I called the most important person. Ethan was like that. One moment pushing me away, the next throwing me a bone. And I, in turn, kept coming back to him year after year. Are you coming with me now? I asked, brushing his arm off and extending my hand to him. Predictably, Ethan didn't come with me. Tonight I've got company. You head back first. He said, dismissively. Understanding his meaning, I turned and left. As the door closed behind me, I caught a faint echo of his mocking tone. See? She's nothing but a lapdog. Ethan. That's the spirit. I didn't get angry, or perhaps I was just used to it by now. Liking Ethan was something I'd been committed to for 10 years. He'd moved to my neighborhood in middle school, and I'd been infatuated from the first moment I saw him. From middle school to high school, and now to college, I'd never confessed my feelings directly. But who didn't already know? Watching him go through girlfriend after girlfriend, I once asked him, "How long do you plan on playing around? Men are naturally fickle." He'd replied, "When I've had enough, I'll come find you." And so, I waited, year after year. Hearing his casual dismissal of me filled me with anger and heartbreak. I wanted to let go, but couldn't. It felt like if I just held on a little longer, he'd finally notice me. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am a fool. Back at school, the lights had already gone out, which meant I'd be spending the night outside. Luckily, I'd prepared for this and checked into a small hotel nearby. The next morning, I found out Ethan had broken up with the woman from last night. The reason? The same as always. She's not as good as you. I just don't like her. But I've been here the whole time. Why can't he see me? He brought breakfast for me, along with a cup of brown sugar water. Your period's coming up, right? This should help with the cramps. Everyone said Ethan didn't like me, but he remembered my cycle, brought me breakfast every day, remembered my birthday, and never missed it. Thanks, I muttered. Don't be silly, why thank me? I wanted to ask him when he'd finally stop playing games, but held my tongue. Ethan rested his chin on his hand, watching me eat the breakfast he'd brought. Once I finished, he grinned. What are you staring at? Just admiring how pretty my sauna is, he quipped, with that roguish charm of his. I blinked. Class is about to start. After he was single again, we went back to our routine, attending classes, eating together, studying in the library. Until one day, he said, "It's a friend's birthday. You're coming with me, right?" He knew perfectly well that I'd never say no to him. Only when I arrived did I find out who the friend was. Sana, you came too. Ethan said he was bringing a friend, and I was curious to see who it'd be. My other roommate, Yuna, greeted me cheerily. Yuna rarely stayed in the dorm and had moved out in our sophomore year. She clung to Ethan's arm, giggling. Ethan, you should have told me it was Sana. I thought it'd be someone else. Most of the guests were their friends, though there were a few familiar faces. The mood turned awkward, and their friends quickly stepped in to smooth things over. Come sit over here, Sana. Can't believe he brought you along to his girlfriend's birthday party. So, Ethan and Yuna were together now. No wonder Rain looked like she wanted to say something that day. At that moment, I felt a chill. I glanced at Ethan, who didn't bother to explain, and continued whispering with Yuna. My heart sank. He'd brought me along just to make me a laughingstock. I barely touched the food and was about to excuse myself when a new person entered. Seeing him, I froze. He was a tall boy in a white suit, with cold, aloof features. The only thing that softened his look was a small red mole at the corner of his eye. Ethan, not cool, man. I just got back from overseas, and you didn't even pick me up. I had to come here myself. From their conversation, I gathered his name was Gray, a physics prodigy returning after 10 years abroad. In that moment, I felt my breath catch. Everything else faded away, all I could hear was the thumping of my own heart. Beside me, Gray nudged my arm, snapping me back to reality. He sat in an empty seat, greeting me somewhat awkwardly. Are you Sana? He asked bluntly, clearly unimpressed. I didn't mind his rudeness at all and pulled out my phone. Hey, handsome, want to add me on WeChat? My bold move took him by surprise. Everyone around us cheered while Ethan smirked. Gray, didn't expect you to find trouble the moment you got back. Ethan didn't seem bothered by my actions. If anything, he looked pleased. He probably thought I was doing it to provoke him. But I wasn't. I just held up my phone, waiting for an answer. Reluctantly, Gray added me, though he whispered a warning. Don't think I'll help you chase after Ethan just because we're friends. Fine. I won't chase Ethan. But could I chase you instead? Because of Gray's presence, I wasn't in a rush to leave anymore. When the party finally ended, Ethan left with Yuna as expected. I watched Gray and when no one was looking, quietly followed him. Gray, can you give me a ride back to school? It's late, and I can't get a cab. I asked. He jumped, taking a step back. What? You want me to take you? Everyone turned to see what was happening. I nodded. They've all been drinking, but you only had juice. Afraid he'd refuse, I added. You wouldn't want me to walk back alone and risk something bad happening, right? Gray's face darkened, thinking I was guilt-tripping him. To my surprise, it was Ethan who urged him to take me back, chuckling as he did. In the end, Gray grudgingly agreed, with much prodding from his friends. The car ride back was awkwardly quiet. Were you caught when you were younger? Don't think I'll help you chase Ethan. We spoke at the same time. Ignoring his words, I repeated my question. His eyes widened in surprise. How do you know? A bold idea was forming in my mind, one that made my heart race. I fumbled with my seatbelt. Oh, Ethan mentioned it. He said he was caught as a child too. Oh, So you just wanted to know more about Ethan, huh? Yeah. I want to know more about him, I replied. He snorted, making the silence even heavier. Plenty of time, I thought. There was no rush. Just as I was about to get out of the car, my phone rang. I purposely put it on speaker. Sana, are you back at school? Bring me something quick. I'm at Yuna's place. And with that, he hung up. I glanced over at Gray to catch his reaction. His brows had drawn together in a slight frown. To extend my time with him a little longer, I hesitated before stepping out. Could you maybe take me there? I gave him Yuna's address, and without a word, Gray hit the gas. After a few minutes of silence, he couldn't seem to hold back any longer and asked, "Does Ethan usually make you run errands like this?" I looked at him, puzzled. Huh? What do you mean? Gray seemed embarrassed, glancing away. I mean, does he often make you do this stuff at night? After that, I noticed his ears turn a bit red. Oh yeah, pretty often actually. Another stretch of silence filled the car. His fingers tapped restlessly on the steering wheel, as if he were mulling over something. When we arrived at Yuna's apartment, I stopped by a convenience store downstairs, grabbed what I needed, and headed up. Yuna opened the door. She was wrapped in a towel, her hair damp like she'd just stepped out of the shower. Sana, I'm sorry for calling you over so late. Red marks were scattered along her neck, almost like she wanted to make sure I saw them. Ethan stepped out from behind her, took the bag from my hands, and said, "All right, it's late. You should get going." And then the door clicked shut. They knew it was late, yet they still had me come all this way. On my way back downstairs, I assumed Gray must have already driven off. But surprisingly, his car was still there. "You waited for me?" I opened the door and slid back into the seat. Gray grumbled under his breath. Such a nuisance, so much to say. I smirked to myself. "Do you actually like Ethan?" He asked out of nowhere. "Do you even know what people are saying about you two?" I looked at him, blinking in mock surprise. Of course I know. But who says I have to like Ethan? Maybe I'd rather like you. Gray was stunned into silence. Later, I texted him. "Thanks for tonight. Let's hang out sometime." No response. But that's okay. I can be patient. When I was 12, I was caught by strangers too. They locked me in a pitch-black room, crammed in with a group of kids just like me. Every day, one of us would disappear. Until eventually, only 5 were left. 3 girls, 2 boys. I was one of them. At that age, everything was terrifying. A boy held my hand tight, trying to reassure me. "Don't be scared. I'll protect you. They'll probably sell me first anyway." When the traffickers came for us again, that boy stepped forward and took my place. I watched him being led away. And sometime after, the police came and we were rescued. For a long time, I couldn't shake the guilt. If I had been taken instead, maybe he'd have been the one who escaped. Not long after that, Ethan's family moved in next door. I'd heard he'd also been caught, just like me. I remember peeking out at him through the window. I remembered the boy in that dark room had a small red mole near his eye. Ethan had a scar there instead. For a long time, Ethan barely spoke. Every day, I'd wait by his door with snacks. At first, he wasn't friendly, but I didn't stop showing up. Over time, we grew close. But today, after seeing Gray, I realized maybe I'd mistaken him for someone else all along. Chapter 2. 10 years have passed. I've tried talking to Ethan about what happened back then. Every time I bring it up though, he flies into a rage. His parents even took him to a doctor, who diagnosed him with some kind of post-traumatic disorder. The next morning, I checked my class schedule. I wanted to ask Gray to lunch, to see if I could learn anything about the past. But my week was fully packed with classes. I'd have to put it off. Meanwhile, Ethan was busy dating Yuna and barely had time for me. Yuna, however, came by the dorm one day. She said she wanted to apologize. "Sana, I'm really sorry for dating Ethan. I had no idea he was the one you'd secretly liked all these years. You're not mad, right?" Judging by her words, she must have been sipping a little too much green tea. "Why would I be mad? I should thank you. After all, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have realized I'd been chasing the wrong person all along." Rain, standing nearby, jumped in to defend me. "Stop pretending. Do you really think no one knows Ethan's the most handsome guy in the computer science department? Who doesn't know him?" Emboldened by this support, Yuna sneered back. "He chased me for a month, showering me with gifts and confessions. Sana couldn't win him over, so now she's blaming me. Even without me, she'd still have no chance. Ethan told me he's absolutely fed up with you. If it weren't for the fact that you grew up together, he wouldn't even bother to talk to you." She ran her fingers along her neck, revealing an irritatingly visible red mark. "In Ethan's eyes, you're just a little tail, always doing what he says." Just as Yuna thought I'd lose my temper, I smiled instead. "Thanks for sharing all of that. Don't worry, I won't bother Ethan again. I wish you to happiness." Her flurry of taunts hadn't provoked me, leaving her feeling like she'd been punching the air. Little did she know, I'd already made up my mind. After she left, I took out my phone and saw an hour-long call log. When she walked in, I'd deliberately called Gray. I hadn't been sure he'd pick up, but thankfully things went as I'd hoped. "Sorry, I dialed the wrong number. Did you hear everything?" Now I had a reason to call Gray again. His reply came quickly. "Yes." So distant, just the way I liked it. To say I felt nothing for Ethan would be a lie. Over the years, it had become about more than just a debt of gratitude for saving my life. But even the deepest feelings can't survive endless neglect. Here's a more detailed revision of your text, enhancing clarity, flow, and subtle emotional shifts. Chapter 2. 10 years have passed. I've tried talking to Ethan about what happened back then. Every time I bring it up, though, he flies into a rage. His parents even took him to a doctor, who diagnosed him with some kind of post-traumatic disorder. The next morning, I checked my class schedule. I wanted to ask Gray to lunch, to see if I could learn anything about the past. But my week was fully packed with classes. I'd have to put it off. Meanwhile, Ethan was busy dating Yuna and barely had time for me. Yuna, however, came by the dorm one day. She said she wanted to apologize. "Sana, I'm really sorry for dating Ethan. I had no idea he was the one you'd secretly liked all these years. You're not mad, right?" Judging by her words, she must have been sipping a little too much green tea. "Why would I be mad? I should thank you. After all, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have realized I'd been chasing the wrong person all along." Rain, standing nearby, jumped in to defend me. "Stop pretending. Do you really think no one knows Ethan's the most handsome guy in the computer science department? Who doesn't know him?" Emboldened by this support, Yuna sneered back. "He chased me for a month, showering me with gifts and confessions. Sana couldn't win him over, so now she's blaming me? Even without me, she'd still have no chance. Ethan told me he's absolutely fed up with you. If it weren't for the fact that you grew up together, he wouldn't even bother to talk to you." She ran her fingers along her neck, revealing an irritatingly visible red mark. "In Ethan's eyes, you're just a little tail, always doing what he says." Just as Yuna thought I'd lose my temper, I smiled instead. "Thanks for sharing all of that. Don't worry, I won't bother Ethan again. I wish you to happiness." Her flurry of taunts hadn't provoked me, leaving her feeling like she'd been punching the air. Little did she know, I'd already made up my mind. After she left, I took out my phone and saw an hour-long call log. When she walked in, I'd deliberately called Gray. I hadn't been sure he'd pick up, but thankfully things went as I'd hoped. "Sorry, I dialed the wrong number. Did you hear everything?" Now I had a reason to call Gray again. His reply came quickly. "Yes." So distant, just the way I liked it. To say I felt nothing for Ethan would be a lie. Over the years, it had become about more than just a debt of gratitude for saving my life. But even the deepest feelings can't survive endless neglect. I always said I'd show you around. Are you free today? My palms were sweaty as I waited for his reply. Gray texted back. No, maybe another time. Meanwhile, Ethan had been calling repeatedly. I'd hung up on every attempt. No doubt Yuna had rushed off to complain. Ignoring Ethan's calls didn't stop him from finding me in person. Sana, why didn't you answer my calls? I avoided his hand as he reached to pat my head and replied coolly. I didn't feel like answering. Do I need a reason? Ethan's hand froze mid-air, his face showing genuine surprise. After a pause, he flashed a faint smile, his lips curving up. Are you mad at Yuna? I've already broken up with her, you know. So don't be mad, alright? It was both amusing and irritating. For once, I looked directly at Ethan and ripped the veil off the truth between us. Ethan, don't tell me you didn't know I like you. Why are you doing this? Are you trying to keep me hanging, or are you just afraid to lose a fool like me? And did you really break up with Yuna because of me? Or was it because you'd already lost interest and needed an excuse to dump her while making me the scapegoat? Don't pretend you're so noble. Ethan refused to admit that I'd been his so-called lapdog. Cornered, he scowled and accused me of being unreasonable. Weren't we always like this? Why change things now? Yes, we were always like this. No matter how often he swapped girlfriends, if I was upset, he'd end things with them instantly. Over the years, he'd changed partners countless times, while I'd stayed by his side. So what? Watching you play the boyfriend while I run errands for you at all hours. Always at your beck and call? Ethan scowled, muttering. Then what do you want? This was laughable. What did he mean by what I wanted? All along, hadn't he been the one calling the shots? Ethan, I don't want anything. We're done. From now on, let's be strangers. After saying it, a huge weight lifted from my shoulders. Without Gray's support, I wouldn't have been able to follow through. Ethan crossed his arms and scoffed. Fine. Sana, you said it. Don't come crawling back. Growing up, we'd argued countless times, with me always the first to apologize. Over time, he'd developed a smug sense of entitlement. I no longer wondered if he thought I was joking. I knew better. If I didn't leave now, I'd be late for class. Just as I entered the classroom, the bell rang. Yuna sat in the front row, glaring at me with red, swollen eyes, clearly having cried. It seemed she was really dumped. Poor me, taking the blame. Throughout the class, I received numerous glares and was even called backup girl by some. But I didn't care because Gray had agreed to go out with me. I sent him my location, and soon a low-key sports car pulled up in front of me. As I got in, Gray's first words were, "Did you and Ethan have a fight?" I thought he genuinely wanted to go out with me, but it turned out he was here to speak on Ethan's behalf. I pretended to get out of the car, but Gray locked the doors. I snapped. Are you here to defend him? No, I was just asking. Don't misunderstand. He said, stepping on the gas, and after a while, he awkwardly asked, Where to? Knowing he wasn't here to speak for Ethan, I calmed down. Let's go to Linjian Road. There's a great wonton shop there. I secretly watched Gray's reaction, curious to see how he would respond. Sure enough, he paused and gave me a surprised look. Mentioning the wonton shop on Linjian Road was a test. When we were caught, I had told him I missed the wontons from Linjian Road. If we ever get out, I'll take you to eat those wontons. They're the best in the world. Okay, it's a deal. Two kids, making a promise before being sold to an unknown place, finally fulfilling it 10 years later. I had taken Ethan there before, but he didn't seem to care. At the time, I thought he had forgotten. 2 bowls of wontons, no scallions or cilantro. I ordered out of habit, then remembered Gray and asked. You don't like scallions and cilantro, right? Gray's gaze lingered on me, and he smiled slightly. That's right, I don't eat them. I had to admit, Gray was indeed very handsome. With clean-cut black hair, dressed in casual sportswear, tall and well-built, his sharp features highlighted by a pair of dark eyes, and the small mole at the corner of his eye adding a touch of allure. It was hard not to be drawn to him. Suddenly, a hand waved in front of my eyes. What are you staring at? Gray had leaned in close. I blushed and quickly walked into the restaurant. Let's sit here. We had barely sat down when 2 steaming bowls of wontons were placed in front of us. Eating in silence, it felt like studying in a library. You're right, these are really good. After finishing the last wonton, Gray wiped his mouth, his eyes reflecting a mix of emotions. At that moment, I couldn't tell if he was praising the wontons or reminiscing about his past self from 10 years ago. Just as I was about to voice my thoughts, a voice interrupted. Gray, Sana? What are you doing here? I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Ethan, the big idiot. He sat across from us with Yuna, helping her wipe the seat. Hey, who knew he could be so considerate? Thinking back to when I came here with Ethan, he always complained about the dirty tables and chairs. Every time, I had to wipe them clean with wet wipes before he reluctantly sat down. Yuna gave me a provocative smile, which I ignored. Ethan smugly said, Sana, are you making my friend speak for you again? Yes. In the past, after arguing with Ethan, he would block me. I would then invite his friends out for a meal, asking them to speak well of me. So it was natural for Ethan to think that. Sana recommended a great wonton shop. I've been away for a long time and don't know many places, so I asked her to be my guide. Gray paid the bill and then looked at me. Shall we go? Without looking at Ethan, I nodded in agreement. After leaving, I thanked Gray. Thanks for that. No need to thank me. I was just telling the truth. I wanted to talk more with Gray, but he received a call from his research institute, so I had to return to school. Sana, tomorrow is New Year's Eve. Do you have any plans? Rain asked after class. Only then did I realize tomorrow was New Year's Eve. Time had flown by. For the past few years, I had always spent New Year's Eve with Ethan. But this time, it was different. I picked up my phone and sent a message to Gray. It took a while for him to reply. Tomorrow? I should be free. What's up? Thinking quickly, I found a not-so-clever excuse. I'm working on my thesis and ran into some problems. Can you help me? Everyone knew Gray was a genius. Asking for academic help wouldn't seem suspicious, right? But I forgot to consider that he was a physics major, and I was a Chinese language major, completely unrelated fields. I thought he might decline, but he agreed. Sure, I'll pick you up tomorrow. That night, I spent a long time choosing an outfit, feeling that none were suitable. If it weren't so late, I would have gone out to buy something new. As expected, I was too excited to sleep. The next day, when we met, Gray teased. Your dark circles are almost as big as a panda's. Trying to become a national treasure. Ignoring his mockery, I rolled my eyes and stubbornly said, You don't understand fashion. This look is in style now. I noticed Gray was also dressed formally, even his hair neatly combed. Where's your laptop? Weren't we going to look at your thesis? I had been too clever for my own good. Unexpectedly, Gray was genuinely there to discuss my thesis. Despite being a science major, he had a deep understanding of humanities literature. The problems that had troubled me for days were resolved in a few sentences. We quickly got to work. Before we knew it, it was dark outside. My stomach growled, and I felt embarrassed. Gray smiled slightly. Let's go. Aren't you going to treat me to dinner? Ah. Sure. Gray chose a garden restaurant with a refined ambience. Seeing the prices, I was stunned. Although my family was well off, my parents were strict with my allowance. Looking at the menu, I felt the prices were too high. Though I was supposed to treat, Gray ended up ordering and paying. It was already 9 o'clock. How could I continue spending time with Gray to celebrate New Year's Eve? Then, a savior appeared. Ethan called, sounding weak. "Sana, I'm sick. Can you buy me some medicine?" I wanted to tell him to see a doctor, but then I agreed. It was part of the plan. I suggested to Gray, "Why don't we deliver the medicine together? He seems really pitiful." Gray glanced at me with a hint of sarcasm. Such a loyal friend. I silently retorted, "Absolutely not." But the car was already heading towards Ethan's place. Gray drove unusually slowly. When the 10th elderly man on a bicycle passed us, I couldn't take it anymore. "What are you doing? Why are you driving so slowly? The roads are slippery with snow. Better safe than sorry." What should have been a half-hour drive took an hour. After parking, I handed him the medicine. "You go up. I'll wait in the car. You're not coming with me? If you believe I suggested this to spend more time alone with you, then sure." Gray almost tripped getting out of the car, making me laugh. Hey, don't think I didn't notice. Since Ethan's call, he had been exuding a stay-away vibe. I didn't know what they talked about upstairs, but Gray came back with a bruise on his lip. "Did Ethan hit you? How dare he?" I almost jumped out, ready to confront him if Gray hadn't stopped me. "It's nothing. He slipped." I didn't believe it, but seeing he didn't want to talk, I kept it to myself. On the way back, I suddenly shouted, "Stop! I need to buy something." Returning with a bag of medicine, I said, "Come here, let me treat your wound." Gray leaned in, closing his eyes. This guy was really handsome. His skin was softer than a girl's, smooth to the touch. "Don't make me treat your wound." Gray suddenly opened his eyes, his deep gaze making me pause. To hide my embarrassment, I quickly applied the medicine. At the dorm, just as I was about to get out, Gray called me back. He handed me a box from the car window. "Sana, Happy New Year." Distant New Year wishes drowned out in my ears. All I could hear was, "Sana, Happy New Year." From then on, Gray and I chatted more and more. At first, I initiated the conversations, but gradually, he started replying. Once, I complained about the cafeteria food. Today's food was so sour, I couldn't eat it. Gray immediately called, laughing. Was it really that bad? I patted my stomach, sighing. Yes. Every time the chefs argue, the food is terrible. We're the victims. Something I said must have tickled him, as Gray burst into laughter. I angrily hung up. Calming down, I realized he had called me first. And I hung up. What was I doing? Just as I was about to text an explanation, his message arrived. Come downstairs. What did that mean? Rain, drying clothes on the balcony, peeked in. Sana, there's a handsome guy looking for you. I went out to see Gray. Ah. Rain, do I look okay? Should I wash my hair first? Knowing my thoughts, Rain pushed me out. You look great. Go! I discovered it only took 40 seconds to get from the third floor to the first. Seeing Gray, I was out of breath, my face red like an apple. In such a hurry to see me? Even more embarrassed, I decided to go for it. Of course, I'm in a hurry to see the person I like. Saying it made me feel shy. But at that moment, something new seemed to grow in my heart. Breaking the awkward silence, Gray shook the lunchbox in his hand. Yes, I was in a hurry too, to bring you food. I was overjoyed. In a daze, I took the thermos, not knowing how I got back upstairs. Someone saw this and reported it to Ethan. He angrily confronted me. If you wanted to make me jealous, you succeeded. Yuna and I broke up long ago. We were pretending to make you jealous. Sana, you can be with me. Stop using Gray to provoke me." He repeated it several times. Over the years, my feelings for Ethan had faded. I was just used to following him, not wanting to lose the boy from my past. At that moment, I wanted to see Gray. I wanted to ask if he was the one from 12 years ago. If he was the one taken by traffickers. If he promised to eat wontons with me. I pulled away from Ethan. "I don't like you anymore, Ethan. Please don't bother me." Chapter 3. I ran to Gray's research institute, which was far from school. "Why are you here?" Gray, in a white lab coat, looked more mature and composed. Gasping for breath, I asked him. "Were you caught 12 years ago? Did you let a little girl go and face the traffickers yourself? Did you promise her to eat wontons on Linjian Road?" After a while, he softly said, "Yes." In that moment, fireworks exploded in my heart. "I recognized you when we had wontons. But I heard you liked Ethan, so I didn't know if I had a chance. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry." "Then why did you still go for wontons with me?" "I've been thinking about those wontons for 10 years. We talked a lot that day. I told him I had mistaken someone else for him. I told him I had long stopped liking Ethan. So, we naturally started dating. At his request, we took a photo and posted it on social media. Within 10 minutes, his WeChat exploded. Ethan's calls came in rapid succession. I suddenly remembered. On New Year's Eve, did Ethan hit you because you told him you liked me? Yes, taking a punch to get you as my girlfriend was worth it. Everyone knew now, Sana and Gray were dating. Chapter 4. Gray's perspective. 10 years ago, Ethan and I were caught. Seeing the number of caught children dwindle, I knew our turn was coming. A little girl was particularly noticeable, crying loudly, making it hard to ignore her. Until only 5 of us were left. When the trafficker came, I knew he would choose her. Thinking her crying was too annoying, I decided to go myself. That way, I wouldn't hear that irritating cry. But I was lucky. Shortly after the trafficker took me, the police arrived. Knowing she was safe, I felt relieved. After that, my parents didn't trust me to stay in the country alone, so they took me abroad. Ethan was my best friend, and we kept in touch over the years. He often mentioned a girl who annoyed him, jokingly calling her clingy. For 10 years, Ethan complained about how annoying this girl was. Sometimes I would think about that girl. Who was more annoying? The first time I met Sana, Ethan warned me not to be too nice to her. "If Sana clings to you, she'll use you to find out about me. Don't be too nice to her." Who knew she would add me on WeChat? Out of curiosity, I accepted. Later, she asked me to take her home and suddenly asked if I was caught 10 years ago. That question almost made my head explode. She asked me out several times, but remembering Ethan's words, I refused. Until one day, I saw her post about wanting wontons on Linjian Road. For some reason, I felt a strange emotion. I agreed to go with her. On the way, she talked about the wontons, just like the girl from my memory. Ethan had psychological trauma, so I didn't want to ask him directly. I asked Uncle Gu instead. I learned Sana was also caught 10 years ago. That confirmed it. She was the girl who went through it with me. When Sana asked me to spend New Year's Eve with her, I didn't hesitate to agree. Discussing her thesis, what could have been resolved in a few sentences, took all day. Of course, she didn't know. I did it on purpose. When I delivered medicine to Ethan, he was shocked to see me. "Are you with Sana?" I told Ethan I liked Sana. He punched me hard. But it didn't matter. Taking a punch to get a girlfriend was worth it. When I took her back to the dorm, I finally gave her the gift I had prepared. I had been thinking about when to tell her the truth. But I worried she still liked Ethan, making me feel defeated. Fortunately, with Ethan's help, we finally ended up together.